This is a really exciting part of the season we're getting to, and it's about getting cricket ready. So we're going to start off this evening with our presentation with Dan, and Dan will take us away with the roadmap.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you again for coming on. And like all of us, passionately happy about the fact that looks like we've got some good news and some light at the end of the tunnel with some cricket returning. But we thought tonight, we're very fortunate tonight to have Graham Charles, who's the Stadium Operations Director at Essex Cricket, to talk around getting our clubhouses and things you might need to look at doing around those clubhouses. And then Daniel Bradley to talk about getting the pitches ready, hopefully, as we all hope for this start going from the 29th of March. Tonight is very much focused around getting that your clubs and your grounds ready in that focus. Next week, we are hoping to have the guidelines, the full guidelines from the ECB that have been signed off from the DCMS around actually what the playing looks like at the plan. The current roadmap you can see on the screen at the moment is where we are currently, and the understanding of what we believe cricket to look like over the next couple of months coming forward. As we know, the main things around this is those keywords at the top, the no earlier date. So obviously, the first stage started this week with the return of schools, and hopefully if that all goes well, on the 22nd of March, the government have confirmed that the next part of step one will take place, and that will include us being able to take part in playing cricket outside. From then onwards, in no earlier than the 12th of April will be the next stage when hopefully hospitality outdoors and that can start to come through, and some of the indoor activities can take place. So, and again, as you can see below, there's dates set out in terms of when that announcement would happen and come forward. But just for now, what we're going to focus on is this early part, this month through March, in terms of how we can get our ground ready and be hopefully prepared in the best way possible as clubs to activate our grounds and playing. One of the things we do realise around this point is that there is the possibility of crossovers of sports coming through, and obviously Graham Pryke, who's on the call at the moment, having a number of conversations, and we're very pleased to say working collectively with the other sports around how we can make the point. People want to be active after being locked down. How do we support and work together? But actually, how do we make sure we can all take place in our own sports going forward? So what does these first two dates look like going forward? So Phil, if you just want to move the slide forward for us. So obviously at the moment, currently cricket activity is still suspended apart from in a school setting, and you've seen that on some of the ECB notices. It does mean we're under a risk assessment. You can carry on within your ground maintenance and your facilities, and hence why the call tonight, so we can start to prepare and make sure everything's getting ready. But you still need to meet the government mitigation guidelines around those processes. So remembering social distancing, basic hygiene, face coverings if you're in certain areas, and no large group gatherings around that. So you need to, as a club, put that risk assessment in place around that, and we'll talk about that as we go through. 29th of March is what we're all waiting for and coming through, and you will see on there that cricket activity will take place. As long as the government allows, we will go through this a bit more next week, but we are expecting it to be up to groups of 30. But things you'll need to think about around your grounds and stuff is there's definitely going to be a lot more mitigation around spectators and groups gathering before and post games and how they flow around your ground and your site. So again, as part of your preparations that will follow from this meeting over the month, is starting to look at how you will manage that situation. And certainly the one thing I would suggest, and Graham will pick up a bit later, is making sure that it's not just reliant on one person this year, and how you can spread that workload of making sure you've got a ground that's ready and a club that's set up to meet COVID regulations and mitigations. And cricket was seen in really good light last year in terms of how it's managed to do that. Obviously some of the winter sports and some of the challenges around large groups gathering has required us to have a few more mitigations in place around that at that early part of returning for the games. What it requires around your clubhouse is, again, the indoor facilities are out. You will be able to have the toilets open and a facility as we had last year around a COVID isolation area, and for safeguarding and first aid is required, but you will need to prep that in those things and obviously have cleaning in place around those points. The changing rooms and showers will be closed again on that 29th of March, and no food beverages will be available at that point. And they come in later from the 12th. For tonight's premises around where we're looking to get our clubhouses and our grounds ready, we'll bring up the other information on next week's webinar as we get more confirmation from the ECB around where we are going forward. So that gives you a heads up in terms of what the roadmap's looking like for this month. And as I say, next week we'll look a bit more around the playing side, but for tonight we wanted to help you just to give you some ideas and focus using the experience we have on the panel around making sure little things are done around your clubhouse and your grounds to make sure they're ready for that 29th of March and that Easter weekend where we're all out back playing in our COVID safe environments like we did last year. So I'm going to hand over to Graham Charles, and he's just going to give you a run through some things to think about around your club facility. So thanks, Graham.
Graham, you may be on mute still.
There we go. Is that better?
There we go.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
No, it wouldn't be a Zoom. It wouldn't be a Zoom conference without a.
No, absolutely. That's me. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'll just following on from Dan's introduction there. I will. I've got one or two just things just to have a look at, just to make sure that all your clubhouses and facilities are all up to standard and how they should be. But a lot of it is just a continuation of what you should already be doing, really. But, with regard risk assessments, fire risk assessments, they would just need to be revised and reviewed, if any, just and brought up to current COVID guidelines. With regard to fire risk assessments, all firefighting equipment, all your fire extinguishers, fire blankets, those of you which may have sprinklers in, which I wouldn't think so, but nevertheless, if you have, they will all need to be serviced, documented, everything all in date, particularly the fire extinguisher and fire blankets for kitchen areas. You probably won't have too many around, but they still all have to be up to all to comply with regulations to again form part of your fire risk assessment. Electricity, make sure your electricity consumer unit is all certificated, all signed off. Again, it may already be, but they're normally about a three-year cycle on those. So if they're in date, if not, just check that out and make sure that's all okay. With those which have emergency lighting as well, that all forms part of that. So do a local test to each one of the lights by obviously turning off the lighting circuit on the consumer unit, or those that have key switches. At the initial test just lets you know that the batteries are all working okay, but on longer term, with your fortnightly or monthly checks, then I think it's about every 3 months you do a full discharge of the emergency light, which normally takes about 5 hours, just to make sure that all the batteries and everything are all working okay. And then following on from that, all portable appliances are all tested, all pat tested. Your kettles, your water boilers, any portable appliance that you may have on site. The bowling machine, if you have one of those, is normally quite as one of the bigger ones that you will need to be tested, because that's used quite regular and very often outside, and it runs off of 240 electric anyway, so that'll all have to be RCD bracket, all protected right the way back to the board. But that would be one to look out for. Gas, any of you have gas cookers, gas in the kitchens, even propane gas. Make sure there's a gas safe certificate, which is all current. And all safe. Again, that will be, if you have a maintenance contract or whatever, or one of the plumbers comes around and has a look and make sure everything's all okay. Again, it's all pretty basic stuff which you should be doing anyway. So it's just a continuation of that, just like you would any other season, really. The most important one of all is make sure your bar areas are all okay and safe. All the bar pipes are all cleaned through. Make sure there's hasn't had any rodent damage to your pipes. Just check everything out, all nice, clean and tidy. And all the appropriate signage is all in place. Fire exit signs, entry signs, exit signs. That will all form part of the COVID risk assessment as well, because there'll be social distancing signs and different things in place for that. One which is quite important, which you may or may not have been looking at since we've been closed down, is I know the showers haven't been in use, but all the showers need to be run and tested and temperature tested, taken purely for the Legionnaire's disease. We've been running ours and testing ours on a weekly basis, but you may or may not have been doing that, but that will need to be, that's quite important to have to get into a routine in testing all that out, all the relevant information for that. I can't remember the temperatures offhand. I should have written it down, but there's certain temperatures that all the water has to get to, and also there's a different set of regulations for blender valves as well. But the HSE have been quite robust on that of late, so that may well be that that might be something to have a look at. If you've got any dead legs of water pipes or anything that's been disconnected, like a sink which is taken away and there's 2 pipes to the sink, they will all have to go, because they're that's quite common, that's a breeding ground for Legionnaires, because there's stagnant water within that pipe. But that would be, that's quite an important, well, they're all important, but that's one which I would take a little bit more not care of, but just have a look at that and make sure that you're all that they're all okay, because showers haven't been run for quite some time. Even with the taps in your kitchens, toilets, any of those areas, make sure that the water is just make sure the water's running through the pipes, really, just to keep it all nice and clear and clean. Yeah, I think that's pretty much really of risk assessments, and that make sure your risk assessments are all up to date, and then with all the COVID mitigation in with that as well. So.
And Chris, which is just advises it's that temperature was 60 degrees centigrade. So
was it 60? Yeah. I couldn't remember, but
yeah, no problem. It's good. Thank you very much for that, Chris. Good to use the chat box. And thank Graham. And obviously, if you've got questions for Graham towards the end of this presentation, please pop them in the chat box, or we may be able to open the mics up depending on how time goes. Okay, I'd like to welcome Daniel. Thanks for joining us, Daniel, this evening. Here's your first slide.
Thank you for having me on. I'm GMA Regional Pitch Advisor for Greater London. Pleased to be on the call with yourselves, and I just wanted to run through some kind of key tips to take when thinking about getting your ground back ready for cricket, and kind of some of the other things that are linked into that as well. So we know, as things stand, maintenance is permitted both at volunteer level and professional level as well. This is obviously with the caveat that you've got COVID risk assessments completed. Now, people on the call are going to be, and up and down the country are going to be in different situations in terms of where they're at with their prep pre-season so far. Some of us might have been fortunate enough to kind of grab the weather window that we've had recently. But if we look at, looking out the window today, it's been gorgeous, but we look at what's coming ahead, it doesn't look too great in the coming days. But there's a couple of considerations to take from this. Obviously, I mentioned having an up-to-date risk assessment, and obviously your COVID compliant systems. This might include obviously social distancing, masks, PPE, identifying areas of transmission within your ground shed if you've got multiple people using the facility there. And obviously sanitizing equipment is a really big one following use. The stay-at-home message is obviously in place until the 29th. So realistically, at the moment, we've had good opportunity to get out and do some work, but it tends to come like a switch in that the weather will change and you're able to get on the grounds, and it's a little bit less of an uphill challenge trying to get the grounds prepped. It's often the little things that we can do at the moment that make the big difference. So some of the important messages on the screen now are things to consider when completing your risk assessment and looking to get out and do work on your ground, please do visit the GMA website there, because we provide up-to-date information on COVID guidance, and also you've got the government's website there, which I'm sure you will be familiar with. If you just flick onto the next slide there, Phil. One thing I did want to signpost to is the grounds management toolkit, which has been developed with the support of the ECB. It's a really, really useful set of information that you can access at the moment. Now, it's been updated most recently and covers off a lot of the pre-season work. So if you do wanted to keep yourself up to date and kind of find out some more information on what, on specific tasks that can be done during this time, and further information on getting your ground ready for cricket this season, it's really worthwhile visiting that. If you wanted to flick onto the next one, Phil. This is the homepage of the pre-season preparation, which is probably the one that you're going to be looking at first of all. As I said, it's had full support from the ECB, and we've worked alongside to kind of develop this. It's cross sports, so if your ground is multi-sport, there's other information covering different sports on there as well. We always welcome feedback on anything on there as well. So if you did want to feedback anything, please do get in touch. The message really to take away is less in the right conditions is better than more in the wrong conditions. So do keep that in mind, and kind of looking at the little tasks that you could be doing currently, identifying areas of poor coverage on the square or even on the outfield, and making small repairs, utilizing germination sheets to bring that seeding on that little bit quicker. Even getting out on the square and continuing brushing, just keeping an eye on the weather and any kind of disease pressures you might be feeling popping up. Obviously keeping an eye out for an opportunity to get on and provide nutrition to the square, but being mindful of the long range forecast on the weather as well all the time, because obviously if you feed the square, you're going to encourage grass growth, and then you're going to need to be able to get on and start cutting more frequently to keep that under control. The emphasis on cutting is to kind of increase frequency rather than to drop the height, ASAP. It's just a kind of little and often approach, which a lot of you will be familiar with. So the other areas that you can look at is kind of having a walk over the outfield and identifying any areas of debris. The other, as well as that, obviously comes the, you're going to be using your sheds a lot more. So it's worth checking out the machinery that you plan to use throughout the season to make sure that's all in good order and working condition, ready for the tasks ahead. The temptation is there to kind of, when you've got a sunny day, to jump on it and get something out and get to work. But really, the situation that we find ourselves in this year, it's almost, the time could be spent on a 50-50 or a rainy day planning, with the extension of the football season as well. And if you've got a ground that's leased, just keep communication going with all parties, and that includes anybody else that's accessing the site. So just make the club aware that if you are going to visit the site and carry out maintenance, people are aware that you're going to be there, because obviously with COVID restrictions, we do have to consider social distancing and contact points. If you just wanted to flick to the next one, Phil. So really, in summary, what to take away is keep yourself updated. Use the GMA's website, use the grounds management toolkit. It's a brilliant resource and really worthwhile. And yeah, that's pretty much it from
okay. Okay, that's great. I really appreciate that, Daniel. Thanks very much. And we're starting to get some comments in the chat box. One from Piers, good question. The panelists like to check the chat box and let me know in a few moments who's going to pick that one up. Just want to bring to your attention an excellent piece of writing that the ECB are drafting at the moment. It will come out formally, hopefully within the next week or so. As I say, the guidelines is about getting ready for the season, and there's a lot of good information, 48 pages of it. Particularly like you to have a look at the end, the appendices 9 and 10, which may well change, but in fact, it's a lot of new ideas. Now, we've got used to last year coping with the changes with lockdown and the release of that. There's 3 areas, those top 3 there, which are, I think we're aware of when we go out, but it's the idea that we have now going to have to be involved in NHS track and trace. That we need, therefore, keeping records about who's actually on the ground. That's both people playing, but also spectators. And also a note there about your NHS QR code. Now, before anybody panics about where you will get that, all this information will be in the document. It's just a simpler case of going through the document, reading through and checking out, and you will be able to download a QR code for your ground. But as I say, watch out for that to come out. It's been mentioned already by Graham about a cleaning plan. And obviously now we're much better prepared for the idea about PPE, what PPE is available, what's your responsibility to supply, and also equally what's your responsibility to supply for volunteers and helpers. So that's all be in the guide. We've mentioned a few times about risk assessment, and obviously one of the most important thing is to make sure that everybody who comes onto the ground, that's from young boys and girls, men and women, whether it's playing or spectators, that you maintain these records through track and trace. If you are going to screen individuals, as we've got used to about when people come in, that's again, guidelines will hopefully come up by April the 29th when we start to think about getting people in. We need to already think about the plan. Last year, certainly going around grounds, it was fairly chaotic in terms of where players and parents sat and watched games, particularly towards the end of the season when there were cup games. We need to really think about that and prepare those areas. Signage and communication, we're ready to go with now. I think we've seen lots of good examples. I think in a sense, even if we use cones, should be enough cones around clubhouses to make sure that we can get socially distanced spacing, which is going to be compliant. And also the other thing, which if you do get anybody who does test positive, however they've tested, then you need to have a clear plan and understanding about what the next stages are. As I said, the document when it comes out is very comprehensive. Do have a look at it. And that's it. Prikey, anything you want to add before we go to the questions?
Yeah, let me just extend a little bit of what you've said there already, Phil. As far as track and trace, I will also send stuff out that we used last year. I'm sure the majority of clubs established some sort of track and trace system. Again, I think it's vital at the start of this season. I think it also, a lot of clubs made sure they had a booking system so that rather than having ad hoc people turning up at your ground, get a system in place so you know exactly who's coming down. So if anything does happen, you know exactly who was at the ground at a certain time. And also, as I say, you can control exactly who's coming down to your ground. So again, you can avoid issues with local authorities or the police or anybody else who might challenge what you're doing. If you've got some sort of record, at least you can hopefully defend your course of action. I think it's going to be very, very important early on. Also, a lot of clubs had a barcode system so that, and again, we saw that everywhere you went. I haven't been out much in a year, but the few places I visited, it was very easy to just sort of put your phone up against something and check that you were in and attending somewhere. I think it's vital that, as say, clubs sort that out. I think most local authorities will probably want to know what you're planning to do and see your risk assessment. And I think maybe Navid has touched on that, but I think most clubs will have had one last year. I doubt any of us that played cricket in a local authority area did so without consulting our local authority or our local parish council. And even if you've not done that previously, I would recommend that as a starting point. It's a good practice, if nothing else, shows goodwill on your part, professionalism, and shows that you know what you're doing. and that will put, if you like, you on the front foot rather than being on the back foot with somebody saying you can't use a site. You're checking that before it happens. I think as well, something that we touched on at loads of our meetings, and I know it's not easy, but it's always the same people, always the same faces having to organise everything. Right now, there are people with vast experiences in your clubs. There'll be teachers, there'll be people who are working in sectors where they've had to go through all sorts of COVID regulations, particularly if they've had to go into work. And I would urge you to draw on those people, share the load a little bit. These are quite tough times to run on your own. And yet if you get a good system, especially, I think Graham's touched on it earlier, but where you've got people with the experience of an entry system, an exit system, even from the field itself, as well as inside a clubhouse when we can go inside again, it's outside that matters as well. And I know from personal experience of having a shared facility that this year is going to be vital that all the sports know what they're doing. And if you're not going to use toilets, or if one sport has control of the toilets because perhaps they're staying longer, or whatever happens, I think you must communicate with those other sports. As Dan has said, I'm doing a body of work with the RFU, the Essex FA, hockey, to try and come up with a template that we can share with you all. It's not going to solve everything. It's not going to be able to fit every single club, but we hope that you'll better go to your joint sports committees and share what we're trying to put together. I believe Dan and I were on the same call, but hopefully nationally, there might even be something that comes down from the national bodies that covers all the sports. But without being rude, the speed they work at and trying to get an agreement, it may be too late. So I think if we can get an Essex version, we will get that out to you as well, just to try and help the situation. Because although some of the football leagues are going to stop, there seems to be an appetite to still play some matches right potentially up until the end of June. Rugby doesn't sound like it's going to have contact till September, but again, I'm sure their juniors will come back. I'm sure there'll be some tags, some exercise. So again, it's just managing sites. We've all been locked in. We all want to come out and play, which is great. And it's just how we do that safely. And as I've said to many people on the calls I've been making recently, what we don't want is somebody wandering past or driving past the ground, seeing loads of people up at a site and deciding to report that for whatever reason, and then putting everyone at risk. So that's there. The two other last things I just want to mention: NatWest Cricket Force has been effectively postponed at the moment, and I would really discourage anyone from thinking about any mass participation until we get some clarity. The bizarre thing at the moment is the 29th of March is signposted for playing and training, but it's not at the moment signposted for anything more than that. So it's a real shame, because I'm normally out there every year sort of encouraging clubs to get out and paint site screens, do stuff inside the clubhouse, paint the clubhouse on the outside. I think you really need to think about curtailing that till we get a perhaps better clearance. There'll still be time in mid-April. You know, Easter would have been great. 4 days when normally we all love to get teams up to our club. But I think right now, unless I'm misreading something, I don't think we really want to encourage that. But as I say, that everything changes all the time. So we'll keep that one in mind. And also, again, the vast majority of clubs last year had the benefit of registering for NatWest Cricket Force and getting a great pack of resources to help with cleaning the ball, sanitising, and using other little bits and pieces. It just saved us all going shopping, I think, and trying to remember what to get. No confirmation as such, but fingers crossed it'll be something similar that comes out again this year. So as and when NatWest Cricket Force says register, for goodness sake, register. You won't get a t-shirt anymore, but hopefully you'll get something that's practical to help our season. So over to you, Dan, in case I've missed, I'm sure I've missed something.
I was going to say that takes us neatly into Piers's question about getting the ground ready, a sort of a Cricket Force day. on the 3rd of April, and Dan's made it very clear that it is still the rule of 6 at that stage. And I don't know, Piers, if you'd like to come in with a question, or Dan, you got any further comment about the idea of a cricket force or getting the ground ready? I think it's pretty clear what you put in the chat box. It's still rule of 6.
Yeah, still rule of 6. In his response, if they risk assess it and they think they can get those 2 groups separately, then on different sides of the ground, then I can't see you'd be able to work with those points. But you need to make sure you're sticking within those rule of 6s and sticking to government guidelines related to that as set out within those environments. As into Nadine's question around risk assessments, yes, bring out last year's risk assessment, brush it down, dust it off, but please wait and respond to the new guidelines coming out around close contact tracing, travelling, and your management and risk management of large groups gathering before and after games or training sessions, as Graham mentioned before. So you definitely use it as a starting point, which is what me and Graham have done with the one at the county ground. But there are little things that have changed because of the variants that are coming out with COVID, plus also all of the mitigations that have sort of been coming points. So just use it as a starting point, but make sure it links into new guidelines as they come out.
Thanks, Dan. An answer to Johnny. Johnny, this is really about club and ground at the moment. The question that you've got is a really good one, but it's going to be addressed next week's webinar, Tuesday the 16th, and that's getting ready to welcome back all the players. So hopefully by then we'll get a little bit more information from the ECB, and certainly please log on next week and come back to that question. I'm sure we'll be able to give you a really up-to-date answer on that one. A note from Josh, again, about support from the parish council in his example, and about how we'll get some additional information. I just Josh, I don't know, do you want to come in, Josh, to follow anything up on there? Josh, anything else you want to say, or any of the people who have put any questions in?
I was just going to say, sorry, Josh here. I don't think we can see each other's chat a lot of the time. Like I can't see anyone else's questions that they've put out. So you need to. I think that's a setting on here. But yeah, from our point of view, parish council, we always have a bit of to and fro with them. And actually, last year it turned out they'd done all the loads of risk assessment. They'd set up QR codes, etc. So that covered about 80% of our risk assessment. And then all we had to do was add some bits to it. In fact, when we shared our final one, they used it to enhance their risk assessment as well. So it's definitely something that has helped our relationship with the council actually as well, sort of going through that process.
Okay, thanks so much for coming with that, Josh. I'll just go through Johnny's question then, because it's an interesting one. And Johnny has said, I've seen a large amount of clubs, myself included, getting on early as they are being pushed by early dates, a number wishing to train or play friendlies on Easter weekend, with no assurance that we will be actually able to play straight on from the 29th. Is there any assurance from the ECB that it will be straight into 11-a-side games, or will it be built in slowly, i.e. groups of 6? Clubs are risking working in poor conditions and causing damage by aiming for dates that we have no idea if they're feasible. Anybody like to make any comment about Johnny's question there?
I think you've just got to remember it's the earliest possible date is the 29th. The information we've been given is it'll be groups of 30 for playing, but you're quite right to have that conversation within your club around the best way of starting. The key bit I would think about looking at some of the guidelines, certainly the government with the new close contact and risk mitigation, is the travelling. So it might be better to have an inter-club game or certain processes, but I think and it's why we wanted to do this one tonight, is it has to be led within your risk assessment and your club and your ground and your facility being ready to host those games. So there's no point rushing back, like you're saying, it ruins the rest of the summer. We've got to do this sensibly coming through, but in terms of playing, our understanding is that the playing will be groups of 30, but I say, as Phil said, we'll confirm that all next week under the playing side, but we wanted to make sure that clubs go away tonight and really start to think around what do we need to do in this month that would enable us, if the government allow under their current roadmap that the 29th of March is enabling us to reactivate sports activity.
Thanks, Dan. Johnny, did you want to come back with any follow-up to that? I've unmuted you.
I'm not muted. I don't know if you can hear me. I've had some trouble with my mic.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, I've unmuted you. Yeah.
My query is about getting grounds ready. Obviously, grounds and pitches. It's just many clubs are well underway trying to roll in conditions that might not be suitable. And as we said, we know a target date is the 29th, and everyone's trying to rush for that date. But if my question was, if we're realistically only looking at groups of 6 from the 29th till, I don't know, say the 10th, and then opening up a bit more past that, then everyone trying to prepare for pre-season friendlies was wasting their time, risking their squares, risking getting machines stuck or damaged or damaging their squares. But Dan sort of answered it by saying we're aiming at groups of 30 all told, so that would, I suppose, allow it.
Yeah, good. And as I say,
it's just the conditional side of things.
Yeah, sure. And as I say, log on next week, Johnny, and then we'll give you as much up-to-date information as we possibly can.